This is Global Order. I'm Hindol Sengupta. I'm delighted that Dinkar Srivastava has joined me today. He's, of course, spent a lifetime as a diplomat in India's Ministry of External Affairs, with postings in Iran, in Pakistan, in the US, and other postings. Today, we're going to discuss this book that Mr. Srivastava has written, Pakistan. I will hold it at Pakistan, Ideologies, Strategies, and Interests. It's been published by Bloomsbury. We will discuss this because I'm really fascinated with the idea of delving deeper into Pakistan's ideology. But I'm going to begin with a slightly newsy question. And I'm going to ask Mr. Srivastava what he thinks, to begin with, of the recent developments between Saudi Arabia and Pakistan.
Agreement between Pakistan and Saudi Arabia, it's being touted as an Islamic NATO. It is a mutual defense agreement. It's an attempt by Pakistan to draw Saudi Arabia into its quarrels with India. But in a sense, it is simply a statement of rent a bomb. It's very different from Pakistan contributing troops to Saudi Arabia, which were stationed there. Pakistan is a nuclear weapon state. Saudi Arabia has had a troubled relationship with Iran. US-Iran negotiations have not gone anywhere. And perhaps it may not be very far from the Saudi policymakers' mind that at some point Iran may go nuclear. So they are probably trying to ensure themselves, to buy insurance. There's another angle to it. This is Saudi vote of no confidence in Trump administration. And during the recent Israeli attack on Qatar, there was hardly any reaction from the White House except for saying that doesn't serve anybody's interests. But there was an American base. They did not shoot down the invading aircraft. This was not the first such attempt. In 1919, Abqaiq and Al Khoraiz refineries in Saudi Arabia were bombed. Saudi or Western suspicion was it was Iran. Iran, of course, denied the responsibility, but America did nothing. So there's a vote of no confidence against American protection. It is also, third, a vote of no confidence against Gulf Cooperation Council. After all, GCC is a collective security mechanism. And instead, Saudi Arabia has decided to rely on a bilateral mechanism. Now, coming to Pakistan, Pakistan has simply got a new bank account. Whether in a crisis it will actually help out Saudi Arabia, that remains to be seen. In 2015, when Saudi Arabia and UAE asked for Pakistani help against Houthis in Yemen, Pakistan refused. This time, Pakistan's economic condition is worse and it's come on board. The critical question is whether this agreement is for Pakistan extending nuclear umbrella to Saudi Arabia, or it goes beyond that. That is, Saudi Arabia actually gets Pakistani nukes. And of course, for that, the price has to be right. Neither side will comment. And at this stage, we can only conjecture. But this is a fraught situation, which it's not going to have any impact on South Asia, because let's remember, Pakistan's alliance with America in 1971 did not stop India from taking action, which eventually resulted in emergence of Bangladesh. And about 20 years or 25 years later, during Kargil War, Pakistan's alliance with China did not prevent, again, Indian action. So this will not prevent Indian action in case Pakistan provokes it in future, but it has certainly allowed Pakistan, it has given them a new bank account.
Let's talk a little bit about Afghanistan now. Another thing that's in the news with the visit, of the Taliban representative to India. In your book, you make a very interesting point that it is purposely that Pakistan has never really defined its border with Afghanistan, hoping to get strategic depth. But you say in your book, this has always turned out to be a misguided belief. In fact, this is the strategic depth that Pakistan has never been able to acquire. And it remains, therefore, a very restive thing. Now, this is particularly interesting because only a few years ago, we all saw visuals of Pakistan's, belief and faith, as it were, that it has, in a sense, installed a new government in Afghanistan with the departure of the Americans that would be friendly to Pakistan, even a puppet government. But all of this is obviously, the tables have completely turned. I want to go to that point in your book where you talk about how this is a misguided belief in the Pakistani army's calculation. Could you talk a little bit about that?
This is a very important point. The theory of strategic depth was voiced by General Hamid Gul in early 90s. He was a former ISI chief. And the theory says that in case of any war with India, Afghanistan will provide strategic depth to Pakistan, which doesn't have depth. Now, Riaz Muhammad Khan, who was Pakistan's foreign secretary, in his book, has exposed the fallacy of this assumption. He has pointed out that in case of any conflict with India, Pakistani forces will have to be concentrated on its eastern border with India, rather than running away to Afghanistan's wilderness. So the theory of strategic depth, to begin with, had no military logic. Then what is it? And there's a different interpretation, which is my interpretation, that this was always a policy of seeking Pakistani sphere of influence in Afghanistan, to treat Afghanistan as a Pakistani protectorate. So the theory of strategic defense was a convenient rationalization. And of course, when you talk about seeking strategic defense against your bigger neighbor by acquiring control over the smaller neighbor, the question is, does the smaller neighbor want to get drawn into this conflict? Afghanistan never had any threat perception from India, and it has always feared Pakistani interference, and it has suffered Pakistani interference and military intervention. Afghanistan, let's remember, was the only country which voted against Pakistan's admission to United Nations. So, the theory of strategic depth is simply an attempt by Pakistan to have a sphere of influence over Afghanistan, and it is with this ambition, it backed an interventionist policy. It supported Taliban's return to power. It undermined American presence in Kabul and brought Taliban to power. Now, unfortunately for Pakistan, those calculations have gone wrong. But that's a different story.
Since we began talking about restive areas, including the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan, I want to come to another point you make in the book. You go into the sources of what really troubled Pakistan about many of its regions. Balochistan, you mentioned Sindh, you mentioned Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and many other places. And you point out that far from being a problem, which in a sense has exploded in recent years, from its very core, from the very beginning of the Pakistani nation, these areas were very fragilely, in a sense, put together with the, or brought together to form the Pakistani nation. In one part, you talk about 400 amendments, which I think, if I remember correctly, is brought about by the opposition in Balochistan, and only one, literally one, is accepted. And of course, we all know what's going on in Balochistan even today. So, could you talk a little bit about the fragility of this union?
In 1947, NWFP under Dr. Khan Sahib, the chief minister of NWFP, he headed a Congress ministry. It was a Congress government, not Muslim League government in NWFP. And Dr. Khan Sahib and his elder brother Badshah Khan of Frontier Gandhi, they wanted to NWFP to join India. So it was essentially a British decision to which, unfortunately, Congress leaders, which includes both Nehru and Patel, acquiesced. They were tired, I think. They acquiesced, and that led to NWFP be left as part of Pakistan. And Badshah Khan made his famous statement that you have thrown us to the wolves. There's a very moving tribute to Badshah Khan by Mrs. Gandhi. There's a biography of Badshah Khan by Tendulkar, and Mrs. Gandhi wrote the foreword, and she has mentioned that we have to hang our heads in shame for leaving NWFP to Pakistan. Balochistan under Khan of Kalat had declared independence, and this was recognized by Jinnah on 11th August. Incidentally, Jinnah represented Khan of Kalat before the cabinet mission, where he argued on behalf of Khan of Kalat that Kalat, which is today's which accounts for much of today's Balochistan, was different from other Indian principalities. It had the status like Nepal. And this is what he recognized, and this is why he recognized Balochistan immediate on 11th August 1947. On Mountbatten's advice, he went back on it. The British, of course, always saw the communist shadow or Soviet shadow falling to reaching out to Arabian Sea, and Mountbatten advised against this step to Jinnah, and Jinnah went back on his earlier decision and sent the army. Now, going forward, about in 1971, after 71 war, this is East Pakistan had broken out. There was the new countries or whatever was left of Pakistan, that its constitution was being debated in Constituent Assembly. And National Awami Party, which was the principal opposition party, moved number of amendments because they represented NWFP and Balochistan, that is the smaller provinces, and they wanted some political space for the smaller provinces. And as you mentioned, 400 amendments moved by the opposition, they were all rejected. Only one was adopted, and Pakistan adopted a unitary constitution which repeated the mistake which Pakistan had made in 47 when it imposed a homogeneous political identity on a diverse people, where different provinces had national and linguistic identities, and though their identities, provincial identities, preceded creation of Pakistan. Pashtun or Baloch or Sindh, they were. There's a famous statement by Wali Khan. He said that I've been Pashtun for 6,000 years. I've been a Muslim for 1,300 years, and I've been a Pakistani for 25 years. So this distinct national and linguistic identity was ignored by Muslim League, which imposed an artificial homogeneous construct, resulted 20 years later in breaking away of East Pakistan. And this mistake was repeated by Bhutto in creating a unitary constitution in 73. And the result is what you see today in Balochistan, which I think this is the fifth or sixth military operation going on. There have been military operations against Pashtun. There have been military operations in Sindh in 1984, Movement for Restoration of Democracy. And there was a military operation against Muhajirs who created Pakistan in 1992 when I was a serving Indian diplomat in Karachi.
I also want to come to the point at the beginning of your book. All of us who've looked at this have read Iqbal's letters to Jinnah, Jinnah's own speeches and so on and so forth. One thing that I found interesting in your book was you talk about Jinnah's connections and correspondence with the Muslim Brotherhood. And you, in a sense, used that example or those examples to talk more definitively about the role of ideology in the formation of Pakistan, which actually has never gone away. Later on, towards the end of the book, you talk about this in with reference to Imran Khan also. But I want you to go to that point of Jinnah's correspondence with the Muslim Brotherhood, which I don't think is that well known.
Jinnah wrote a letter to Muslim Brotherhood chair after Pakistan became independent, assuring him that Pakistan will be based on Sharia. And this letter was written after his famous speech of 11th August 1947, where he had talked about an enlightened vision of Pakistan, where he said Muslims are free to go to their mosques, Hindus are free to go to their temples, and Christians are free to go to their churches. But this was simply a chimera. It was a tactical move. He had led a communal movement for partition of the country for 7 years. When you lead a political movement, it's not an electric switch which you can switch on and off. And after making this brief deviation from his famous two-nation theory, he reverted to it. And in fact, he went so far as affirming in a statement in Karachi Bar Council in February 1948, 6 months after his speech, that Pakistan's constitution will be based on Sharia. And he had also given assurance to the ulama in Pakistan, that Peer of Monkey Sharif, which was quoted in debate in Pakistan Constituent Assembly, where Maulana Shabbir Usmani stated that Jinnah's true vision of Pakistan was of a country based on Islamic Sharia.
A little bit about how this ideology developed. One of the sort of distilled points that comes out of your book is this effort to use Islam constantly to, in a sense, fuse together identities which are actually disparate. And these are two forces constantly fighting, as it were, on the body polity of Pakistan. How do you see, this struggle even today? I mean, Pakistan is a very different state today. The army is again, entirely in power. There's a new field marshal. Its economy is weaker than ever. But that glue seems to be undiminished, or at least the effort to use that glue seems to be undiminished.
6 months after Jinnah's death, Liaquat Ali Khan brought what is called Objectives Resolution to Pakistan's Constituent Assembly. As the name suggests, the resolution defined the objectives of the new state. The resolution, in its preamble, said it mentioned sovereignty of Allah Almighty over the entire universe. And it said that his authority is delegated to the state of Pakistan through its people to be exercised within the limits set by him. Now, there are 3 implications of this. The first is where, the sovereignty of the divine, or divine sovereignty, runs counter to the principle of popular sovereignty, which is a bedrock of democracies. And democracies, people are sovereign and they delegate their sovereignty to the parliament. Second, that in a country, if the constitution is based on the faith of the majority community, it puts the minority rights on a very precarious perch. And the third, this objective resolution went on to say that the state of Pakistan will enable Muslims to live their lives in accordance with Quran and Sunnah. Now, this has allowed Pakistani state to intervene in the personal sphere of the lives of the members of the majority community, because the state will decide how a Muslim has to live their lives. And this is the present predicament of liberals in Pakistan. They find themselves squeezed by this increasing attempt by a state which is lurching towards increasing Islamization, both state and society lurching towards increased Islamization. Now today, if you fast forward to, you mentioned Imran Khan, there's a triangular contest going on between Imran Khan, army, and TTP. TTP is Tehreek-e-Taliban in Pakistan, an offshoot of Taliban. And TTP's presence in Afghanistan is the bone of contention between Pakistan and Taliban, which has created a divide between them. Now, interestingly, all three are wedded to the same ideology which is anchored in the Arabia of the 7th century. Imran Khan talks about Riyasat-e-Madina. The army chief, General Aslam, General Asim Munir, in his speeches, mentions that Pakistan is the only state after Riyasat-e-Madina to be based on Kalma. So, in fact, this kind of claim is not even made by Saudi Arabia, which is the cradle of Islam. Saudi monarchy very humbly describe themselves as the humble servants of the two mosques of Medina and Makkah. They don't claim that Saudi Arabia is, it's a modern day Medina, which is a claim made by the army chief, who who is both has assumed the role of both a soldier and and a priest. Now the third is the Tehreek-e-Taliban in Pakistan, TTP. And TTP are more logically consistent than either Imran Khan or Pakistan Army. TTP is saying that if Pakistan promoted Islamic Emirate in Afghanistan, why not Islamic Emirate also in Pakistan? So that is the bone of contention, because in a country where religion holds so much of power, is the ultimate source of legitimacy, whosoever controls this narrative of what the religion is or says has the ultimate power. And this is the reason for this struggle. It's an ideological struggle between TTP, army, and Imran Khan for the soul of Pakistan. They are wedded to the same ideology, but each wants to control the narrative for their own ends.
I want to talk a little bit about nuclear weapons, considering what just happened in Operation Sindoor, the, yet unconfirmed, at least from the Indian side, bombing of strategic bases in Pakistan and so on and so forth. And of course, Pakistan's constant, incessant saber rattling on the nuclear question. In your book, you make the point that this parity that Pakistan constantly talks about is actually, again, a chimera. You don't need parity in a literal sense if deterrence is what you're trying to aim at. You make the point that actually this again is an extension of the ideological basis of Pakistan. Perhaps you could elaborate.
As you rightly mentioned, nuclear deterrence does not require parity. There is a huge asymmetry between the number of nuclear warheads which America has and which China has. But that does not mean that China has not been able to deter America. It has deterred America. It has deterred also Russia with the same kind of asymmetry. So the desire to seek parity in terms of nuclear weapons or whatever, it goes back to, again, that it's an ideological question. It goes back to pre-partition period where the Muslim League, which claimed to represent Muslims who were 25% of the population, staked a claim for parity, which was a disguised, way of saying we were the ruling race and we want to be rulers again. And that continues to date. Now, let me just mention here, there's a vast difference between the concept of nuclear deterrence as it is understood and as Pakistan practices it. During the Cold War, both sides on the political divide insulated nuclear deterrence from the question of ideology and territorial dispute. In Europe, Helsinki Agreement, which included both West and the East, said that the borders cannot be changed by use of force. They were, isolating the nuclear issue with the territorial dispute. In case of Pakistan, it links nuclear issue to Kashmir and it describes Kashmir as a nuclear flashpoint. It goes further. It describes Kashmir as an unfinished agenda of partition. This is a statement of ideology. So this has made it very difficult because deterrence is based on cold calculation of risk and interest. But when you link it to faith, faith cannot be negotiated. You are, venturing into a different territory where this matrix breaks down.
Wrap up this conversation with a question about the renewed bonhomie, as some people see it, between the United States and Pakistan. Now, there is, of course, a very strong sense of deja vu in this story. This happens. This is almost, somebody had told me recently that this is almost cyclical, as it were, between the United States and Pakistan. I wondered, as a long-time Pakistan watcher, how you see this renewed engagement between the United States and Pakistan.
This renewed engagement between United States and Pakistan has nothing to do with South Asia or Kashmir, which is how, unfortunately, many in Indian media have projected it. We Indians are used to looking at things from our own point of view. It is linked to, in my assessment, to Iran. And this is borne out by the sequence of events. On 10th June, General Kurvilla, the head of US Central Command, gave a testimony to US Congress in which he said, this is the best time to hit Iran. In the same testimony, he mentioned Pakistan as a useful ally in war against terrorism, and he mentioned that, Pakistan handed over a terrorist accused of killing of 13 or 21 US Marines at the time of evacuation from Kabul in 2021. Now, this begs the question. It was Pakistani support to Taliban which undermined American presence for 20 years and all the money they poured in. So Americans could not have forgotten that. So the reason for the support to Pakistan is elsewhere. Now, let me complete the sequence. So this was 10th June, 13th June, Israel attacked Iran. 15th June, General Asim was received in White House. On the same day, Pakistan announced closure of the border outposts. It had, in effect, backstabbed Iran. Iran, most of Iran's trade goes through ports in the West, in the Gulf. But, these land outposts, which do not account for much in the normal times, is their insurance policy that in case of conflagration in the Hormuz Strait, if their ports are closed, this is their lifeline, and Pakistan closed it. It was Iran in 1965 which had given asylum or sanctuary to Pakistani Air Force against India. Pakistan has paid it back. So Pakistan's payoff is because of the services rendered against Iran. Now, this is an extremely sensitive issue within Pakistan, because if it came out that Pakistan was serving US interests against its Muslim neighbor, and actually the interests of the Jewish, what Asim Munir calls Jewish state, Israel. America is not so much bothered about Iran, it's Israel. If this will be an explosive situation for Pakistan army. So this attempt to cover up and, link it to various other things. And of course, whatever military assistance or economic assistance Pakistan receives, it will use against India. That goes without saying. But that does not explain the reason why it has got that money.
As always, it has been a fascinating conversation with Dinkar Srivastava, author of this new book, Pakistan Ideologies, Strategies, and Interests, published by Bloomsbury. Fascinating book. Congratulations. Enjoyed reading your book very much. Thanks very much for joining me on Global Era to have this conversation on Pakistan's ideologies and what they mean in geopolitics today. Thanks very much for your time. And for everybody who's watching, all you need to do is, of course, click on the bell icon and join the family of Global Ever as we bring you more and more such conversations from around the world, crossing now more than 2 million views to 130 countries. I'm Hindol Sengupta. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me on your program. Thank you very much.